The burn was immediate, a blinding inferno that stole my breath and rendered the world into a hazy blur of pain. My eyes, usually accustomed to the gentle morning light, screamed in protest. I stumbled back, the familiar sidewalk suddenly treacherous under my feet. My cane, my faithful companion on these morning jaunts, clattered uselessly on the pavement, adding insult to injury. The air, once crisp and filled with the promise of a new day, now reeked of acrid chemicals. I clawed at my face, desperate, to scrape away the searing sensation. But it was no use. It felt as though my skin was being flayed alive, each nerve ending screaming in unison. Through the haze of pain, I could still hear her shrieking. The woman, the Karen, as the younger generation so aptly calls them, continuing her tirade. Her words, though distorted by the burning in my eyes and the panic rising in my chest, still managed to penetrate the fog. She was yelling about threats neutralized, about protecting the neighborhood, about how I clearly didn't belong. Her voice dripped with venom, her self-righteousness a thick, suffocating blanket. It was surreal, a nightmare unfolding in broad daylight. I, Harold Jenkins, a retired accountant whose biggest daily challenge was thwarting the relentless advances of squirrels, was being attacked, verbally and physically, by a woman I had never laid eyes on before. I remember stumbling onto the perfectly manicured lawn of the O'Malleys, their meticulously arranged garden gnomes suddenly looming like grotesque figures in my distorted vision. I collapsed amongst them, a heap of bewildered pain and disbelief. The pepper spray continued its agonizing work, each breath a fresh wave of torment. I was gasping for air, my lungs struggling to pull in the oxygen they desperately needed. It felt like drowning on dry land, the burning in my face mirrored by the burning in my chest. I could hear the distant sound of sirens growing louder, a promise of help amidst the chaos. But even with the promise of relief on the horizon, the humiliation stung almost as much as the pepper spray. To be accused of lurking, of being a threat, of not belonging in the neighborhood I had called home for over 3 decades was a blow to my very sense of self. I had always taken pride in being a good neighbor, a pillar of the community. I volunteered at the local soup kitchen, donated to the church, and always made sure to shovel the sidewalks of the elderly neighbors during the winter. My wife, bless her soul, had instilled in me the importance of community, of looking out for one another. And now, here I was, lying on someone's lawn, accused of being a menace, all because of the prejudice and paranoia of a complete stranger. The irony was almost unbearable. The teen across the street, I think his name was Kevin, continued to record the scene on his phone, his presence a strange mix of reassurance and intrusion. He was a witness, a chronicler of this absurd injustice. And while I was grateful for his presence, I couldn't help but feel a pang of embarrassment at being reduced to a spectacle, a victim of unwarranted aggression. The arrival of the police was a welcome sight, a beacon of hope in the swirling chaos. Officer McCarthy, a young man with a kind face and reassuring demeanor, was the first to reach me. He immediately began to flush my eyes with bottled water from his patrol car, the cool liquid providing a momentary respite from the burning. His voice was calm and steady as he asked me questions, guiding me through the fog of pain and confusion. He asked for my identification, my address, and a brief account of what had happened. I struggled to articulate the events, my voice hoarse and shaky from the pepper spray. But Officer McCarthy patiently listened, his presence a grounding force in the midst of the turmoil. Meanwhile, Karen was holding court with the other officers, gesticulating wildly as she recounted her version of the events. I could hear her, voice rising and falling, her words laced with self-righteous indignation. She painted me as a suspicious character, a potential threat to the safety of the neighborhood, claiming she had apprehended me before I could commit some unspeakable act. It was a grotesque distortion of the truth, a calculated attempt to justify her unwarranted aggression. I watched as Officer McCarthy approached her, his expression unreadable. He listened attentively to her account, occasionally interjecting with questions. There was a sense of unease in the air, a palpable tension as the two narratives clashed. It was clear that the officers were trying to piece together the truth, to separate fact from fiction in this bizarre and escalating situation. After speaking with Karen, Officer McCarthy turned his attention back to me. He asked if I would mind walking to my house to confirm my address, a standard procedure, he explained, to verify my residency. With Officer McCarthy's assistance, I slowly made my way down the street, each step a testament to the lingering effects of the pepper spray. As we approached my house, I could see the familiar sight of my carefully tended garden, the porch swing that my wife and I had spent countless hours on, the mailbox with my name emblazoned on it in bold black letters. It was a comforting reminder of my place in this community, a silent rebuttal to Karen's accusations. Officer McCarthy verified the address, his expression subtly changing as he took in the scene. He seemed to be piecing things together. Any neutral observer would quickly realize how ridiculous defense of the neighborhood was. The shift in the officer's demeanor was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He returned to Karen, a slight frown etching itself onto his face. He began to ask her more pointed questions, grilling her about her residency in the neighborhood, her reasons for being there, and her knowledge of the area. Karen's initial confidence seemed to falter, her voice becoming less strident, her explanations less convincing. She fumbled for answers, her carefully constructed narrative beginning to unravel under the scrutiny of the law. It was then that the first crack appeared in her facade, the first hint that things were not as they seemed. The truth, like a relentless tide, was beginning to erode the foundations of her lies. The teen Kevin still had his phone out, and now a crowd was starting to gather as word spread. The question that shattered Karen's charade was simple, deceptively innocuous. "Ma'am," Officer McCarthy asked, his voice polite but firm, "can you confirm which address you reside at in this neighborhood?" Karen, without hesitation, pointed across the street, directly at my house. The house I had lived in for 34 years. The house with my name on the mailbox. The house with the meticulously maintained garden. The house that was as much a part of me as my own skin. The audacity of her claim was staggering, a brazen attempt to rewrite reality in her own twisted image. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Even through the lingering effects of the pepper spray, I could feel my jaw drop, my mind reeling from the sheer absurdity of it all. My neighbors must have been thinking the same thing, because I could suddenly hear gasps and murmurs spreading through the crowd. Officer McCarthy raised an eyebrow, his expression a mixture of skepticism and amusement. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with incredulity, "are you claiming to live at the residence of Harold Jenkins?" Karen, flustered but undeterred, doubled down on her lie. She claimed she was renting the property, that I was merely a caretaker, an elderly gentleman who assisted with the upkeep of the house while the owners were away. It was a preposterous claim, easily disproven, but she clung to it with a desperate tenacity. At this point, it was clear to everyone present that Karen had no connection to my house, to my neighborhood, or to any semblance of reality. Her, carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the twisted, delusional individual beneath. It was now just one lie after another. She was desperately trying to salvage the situation. Officer McCarthy calmly requested further documentation to support her claim of residency. He asked for a lease agreement, a utility bill, or any other proof that she lived at my address. Karen, of course, could provide none. She stammered, she equivocated, she offered a series of increasingly implausible explanations. But the truth was undeniable. She was not a neighbor. She was not a renter. She was an impostor, a fraud, a complete and utter fabrication. At this point, one of the other officers, Officer Rodriguez, approached Officer McCarthy and whispered something into his ear. The officer nodded slowly. Officer McCarthy turned back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now stern, "we are going to need you to come with us to the station. We have some further questions we'd like to ask you regarding your residency, and a few other matters." Karen's face paled, her defiant demeanor finally cracking under the weight of her lies. She knew the game was up. The crowd that had gathered to watch the strange events unfold collectively released its pent-up breath. Officer Rodriguez had recognized Karen. Turns out, she has quite the reputation. Turns out, she had been banned from another neighborhood just a few months prior. The details were equally bizarre and disturbing. Apparently, she had pepper-sprayed a mailman, accusing him of stealing her identity and tampering with her mail. The incident had caused quite a stir, resulting in her expulsion from the neighborhood and a stern warning from the local authorities. And now, here she was again, repeating her act of aggression and deception in my quiet suburban street. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, revealing a disturbing pattern of behavior. Karen wasn't just a misguided busybody. She was a habitual troublemaker, a purveyor of chaos and paranoia. The question became, what was she doing in my neighborhood? Why had she targeted me? What was her ultimate goal? The answer, as it turned out, was as bizarre as the rest of the story. Officer Rodriguez quickly realized she had been squatting in a vacant Airbnb 2 doors down from my house. The owners were overseas, and the property had been empty for several weeks. Karen, exploiting the opportunity, had broken into the house, staged it to look occupied, and had been masquerading as a resident, walking her dog and monitoring the neighborhood. It was a cunning and audacious scheme, driven by a twisted sense of entitlement and a desire to control her surroundings. She saw herself as a self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, a protector of the peace, a defender against perceived threats. And I, an elderly man taking an innocent morning walk, had become her target, her victim. The revelation of her squatting was met with gasps of disbelief from the assembled neighbors. The idea that someone could brazenly break into a house and pretend to live there was shocking, a violation of the unspoken code of trust and security that held our community together. The news spread through the crowd like wildfire, fueling their anger and disgust. Karen, exposed as a fraud and a criminal, was now facing the full wrath of a community she had sought to dominate. The police began to investigate the Airbnb, confirming that Karen had indeed broken into the property and had been living there illegally. They found evidence of her staging efforts, the carefully placed decorations, the strategically arranged belongings, all designed to create the illusion of occupancy. They also discovered a trove of disturbing paraphernalia, including surveillance equipment, handwritten notes detailing the routines of her neighbors, and a collection of news articles about crime and security. It was clear that Karen was not just a squatter. She was an obsessive, a paranoid, a woman consumed by her own distorted sense of reality. The pieces of the puzzle were now complete, but it didn't stop there. The most unbelievable truth was still yet to be revealed. Turns out Karen was on probation in another state for impersonating law enforcement. She had apparently once pretended to be a sheriff's deputy, complete with a fake badge she bought online. This fact floored everyone. It was almost too bizarre to be true, but there it was, plain as day, in her criminal record. She didn't just think she owned the neighborhood. She apparently thought she was the law. This explained so much. Her aggressive demeanor, her self-righteous pronouncements, her unwavering belief in her own authority. It all stemmed from this deep-seated delusion. This woman thought she was a sheriff. I, an elderly man who enjoys simple pleasures like taking walks and watching birds, had been assaulted by a delusional sheriff's deputy. To add insult to injury, she had the audacity to accuse me of being a threat to the community. The arrogance and entitlement of this woman were beyond comprehension. The police began searching the Airbnb more thoroughly. They found a fake badge, a replica of a sheriff's star, tucked away in a drawer. It was a cheap, flimsy piece of metal, but it represented something far more sinister. Karen's complete detachment from reality. This sheriff's deputy thought I was part of a secret geriatric operation. The discovery of the badge was the final straw. The police immediately placed Karen under arrest, charging her with a litany of offenses, including assault, trespassing, impersonating law enforcement, and violating her probation. As they led her away in handcuffs, she began to rant and rave, her voice rising in pitch and volume. She accused me of being part of a secret geriatric operation, claiming that I was conspiring with the squirrels to undermine the neighborhood's security. She rambled about pepper spray laws, deep state surveillance, and a vast conspiracy that was out to get her. It was a bizarre and unsettling spectacle, a glimpse into the fractured mind of a woman who had completely lost touch with reality. As they drove her away, I sat on my porch as the adrenaline slowly began to wear off. The burning in my face had subsided, but the emotional scars remained. I felt violated, shaken, and deeply disturbed by the events that had unfolded. How could someone be so consumed by hate, by paranoia, by delusion? What had driven her to such extremes? As the crowd dispersed and the street slowly returned to normal, I couldn't help but wonder about the state of the world. How had we reached a point where people were so quick to judge, to condemn, to resort to violence? What had happened to empathy, to compassion, to the basic human decency that should bind us all together? I sat there for a long time, lost in thought, trying to make sense of the chaos. The squirrels I hated were looking at me, clearly mocking my misfortune. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, media inquiries, and concerned phone calls from friends and family. I became a reluctant celebrity, the victim of a bizarre and outrageous crime. I was inundated with messages of support from neighbors, from strangers, from people all over the world who had heard my story and were appalled by what had happened. Their kindness and compassion were a balm to my wounded spirit, a reminder that there was still good in the world, even amidst the darkness. The local news covered the story extensively, focusing on the absurdity of the situation and the alarming rise of Karen culture. They interviewed my neighbors, who spoke of my long-standing presence in the community, my kindness, and my unwavering commitment to helping others. The Airbnb owners filed a restraining order against Karen, barring her from ever setting foot on their property again. They expressed their gratitude to the police for their swift action and their deep concern for my well-being. I found out later that the owners were so worried they offered to let me stay at the Airbnb for as long as I needed. I told them I was comfortable in my own home, but I appreciated the gesture. As for Karen, she languished in jail, awaiting her trial. I was told that the police thought the sheriff's department might press charges as well. I didn't feel malicious, but I wasn't going to stop them. I decided to focus on healing, on moving forward, on reclaiming my peace of mind. I returned to my daily routine, my morning walks, my battles with the squirrels, my quiet evenings on the porch. But things were different now. I saw the world through a different lens, a lens that was both more cautious and more compassionate. I realized that hate and prejudice could lurk in the most unexpected places, and that it was essential to be vigilant in defending against them. But I also realized that kindness and empathy were powerful weapons, capable of overcoming even the darkest of forces. And so, I continued to walk, to wave, to pay my taxes, to mow my lawn, and to drink my coffee black. But now, I also carried with me a newfound sense of purpose, a determination to be a force for good in the world, to stand up for what is right, and to never let hate triumph over hope. And maybe, just maybe, to finally find a way to outsmart those pesky squirrels.